muscular, wealthy CEO, and his family mocked her late mother at the rehearsal dinner. So she called off the champagne glass nearly slipped from Kendra's fingers. These people were talking about her like she wasn't 10 feet away, like she was invisible. But what hurt most was Logan's reaction, or his lack of one. He just stood there, nodding along with his family's cruelty. Have you ever been in love with someone whose family saw you as less than? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The microphone trembled in Kendra's manicured hands as 200 of Atlanta's elite stared up at her, champagne glasses frozen mid-toast. Just moments after she'd heard Logan's family calling her late mother the help who didn't belong at million-dollar weddings. But what happened in the 63 days after she walked out would make every person in that room beg for her forgiveness. Have you ever been in a room where you suddenly realized you were the joke? Have you ever felt your heart break in real time while surrounded by people celebrating? Do you know what it's like when the person you love most stays silent while others tear you down? Picture this. Your wedding rehearsal becomes the most humiliating moment of your life, broadcast live on social media. What would you do if walking away from love meant walking into power? Stay tuned, because Kendra's next move will shock you. If you've ever been underestimated because of where you came from, this story will hit different. Hit that like button and buckle up. Let me take you back to where dignity met its match and revenge got a new name. She had practiced her wedding toast 57 times in the mirror, but never once had she imagined using the microphone to say goodbye. The Georgian mansion's crystal chandeliers cast golden shadows across faces that smiled like angels but spoke like demons. Their laughter echoed off marble floors that had never known the weight of honest work. Kendra stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Logan's family celebrate tomorrow's wedding like they were crowning a king instead of witnessing love. Logan Davidson looked every bit the part of a Texas oil prince. 6 feet 3 inches of muscle wrapped in a custom tuxedo, his smile bright as Houston sunshine. He built his CEO reputation on charm and his family's money. But tonight something felt different. Tonight, his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Can you believe she actually thinks she belongs here? The whisper came from Logan's sister, Crystal, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she gestured toward Kendra. Her mother cleaned hotel rooms for a living. Kendra's chest tightened. Her mother, Viola Washington, had worked 2 jobs to put her through North Carolina Central University. Those same hands that scrubbed floors had also braided Kendra's hair and saved every penny for her daughter's education. Some people don't understand their place. Logan's father chuckled, swirling his whiskey. Money can't buy class, but at least it can rent some decent clothes for the weekend. The champagne glass nearly slipped from Kendra's fingers. These people were talking about her like she wasn't 10 feet away, like she was invisible. But what hurt most was Logan's reaction, or his lack of one. He just stood there, nodding along with his family's cruelty. Crystal continued her performance for the small crowd gathered around her. Did you know she grew up in one of those tiny North Carolina towns? Her mother never even owned a car. Can you imagine? Well, Logan's aunt chimed in. At least Logan's having fun. Boys will be boys, but marriage is about family legacy. Thank goodness this won't last long. That's when something inside Kendra broke wide open. Not just cracked, shattered completely. She thought about her mother's calloused hands, about working double shifts to afford her daughter's college textbooks, about the pride in Viola's eyes when Kendra graduated summa cum laude. The microphone sat on the small stage, waiting for the official toast to begin. Kendra walked toward it with steady steps, her heart pounding like thunder in her chest. Every eye in the room turned toward her as she climbed the 3 steps to the platform. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I know we're supposed to save the speeches for tomorrow, but I have something to say that can't wait." Logan's face went pale. His family exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing their private conversation might not have been as private as they thought. "My mother, Viola Washington, worked as a hotel maid for 30 years, Kendra began, her voice growing stronger with each word. She cleaned rooms, scrubbed floors, and changed sheets so that her daughter could could have opportunities she never had. She died 2 years ago, but not before seeing me graduate college with honors and start my own marketing consulting business. The room was dead silent now. Someone's phone was recording. She could see the red light in her peripheral vision. Tonight, I learned that some of you think she wasn't good enough to be mentioned at this wedding, that her sacrifices and her love somehow make me unworthy of standing in this room. Kendra's voice never wavered, though tears threatened to fall. You're right about one thing. I don't belong here. Logan finally found his voice. Kendra, please. No, she said firmly, looking directly at him. You had your chance to speak up when they were tearing down the woman who raised me. You stayed silent. That tells me everything I need to know about what our marriage would look like. She pulled off the engagement ring, 3 carats of gilt money, and set it on the podium. If my mother isn't good enough for this family, then neither am I. I won't apologize for where I came from, and I won't marry into a family that sees love as charity work. The gasps were audible now. Camera phones were out everywhere, capturing every word for social media posterity. But Kendra didn't care about the cameras or the consequences. She cared about her mother's memory and her own dignity. Logan, I hope you find someone your family considers worthy, she said, stepping away from the microphone. As for the rest of you, enjoy your champagne. You'll need something to wash down the taste of your own words. She walked through the crowd toward the exit, head high, refusing to run despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. Logan called her name twice, but his voice sounded weak and distant, like an echo from a life she was already leaving behind. Have you ever been in love with someone whose family saw you as less than? Drop a heart if you felt invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to welcome you. As she walked past Logan's shocked face toward the exit, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the live stream. Call me. We have work to do. Marcus Davidson, attorney. She had no idea that message would change everything. Logan had 48 hours to call and explain, to apologize, to fight for what they'd built. Instead, he sent a text that confirmed every fear she'd buried. Kendra's one-bedroom apartment in Charlotte felt like a sanctuary after the mansion's false grandeur. The silence here was honest. No whispered slurs hiding behind designer smiles. No judgment masquerading as champagne toasts. Just her thoughts, and the weight of a decision that had changed everything. The text came Saturday morning, 2 days after she'd walked out of her own rehearsal dinner. Kendra, I'm sorry about what happened. Family pressure is complicated. Maybe we can work this out after things calm down. Logan, she read it 3 times, hoping somehow the words would change, would show some recognition of what had really happened that night. But there it was, family pressure, like their cruelty was just weather, something that couldn't be helped or controlled. No mention of her mother. No acknowledgement of his silence when she needed him most. No understanding that this wasn't about embarrassment or hurt feelings. It was about discovering the man she planned to marry was too weak to protect what mattered. Kendra deleted the message without responding. Some conversations weren't worth having. Her phone rang an hour later. Unknown number, but she recognized the area code, Atlanta. She almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another reporter wanting to interview the runaway bride, who'd gone viral on social media. But something made her answer. Miss Washington, this is Marcus Davidson. I sent you a message Friday night after seeing your speech online. Davidson, Kendra's stomach dropped. Are you related to Logan's family? A dry laugh came through the phone. Unfortunately, yes. Logan's my second cousin, though I haven't spoken to that side of the family in 15 years. I'm a civil rights attorney based in Atlanta, and I specialize in cases involving environmental racism and corporate accountability. Kendra sat down hard on her couch. I don't understand what that has to do with me. Everything, Marcus said simply. Your speech Friday night got over 2 million views on social media. But more importantly, it got the attention of some very powerful people who've been waiting for the right person to help expose what Logan's family has been hiding for decades. What are you talking about? Davidson Oil Industries has been systematically poisoning Black and brown communities across the South for 30 years. They've paid millions in hush money, buried environmental impact studies, and use their political connections to avoid federal oversight. But they've never faced someone like you. Kendra's head was spinning. Someone like me? Someone with nothing left to lose, everything to prove, and a national platform to work from. Someone who understands that justice isn't just about individual hurt. It's about protecting communities that look like the one you grew up in. The words hit her like cold water. She thought about her hometown, about the kids who got sick more often than they should, about the creek that ran behind her childhood home. The one that always smelled strange and turned funny colors after it rained. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because 30 years ago, Davidson Oil bought my father's farm in Georgia for a fraction of what it was worth, then turned it into a waste disposal site. My family got cancer. 3 of them died, including my little sister. I've been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment to strike back." Marcus's voice grew harder. "Friday night, watching you stand up to those people, I realized the moment had finally come. They think they broke you, Miss Washington. They have no idea you're about to break them." Kendra stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the Charlotte skyline. "I'm not looking for revenge, Mr. Davidson. I just want to move on with my life." "This isn't about revenge," Marcus said firmly. "This is about justice. This is about making sure no other young woman has to choose between her dignity and her future. This is about communities that have been suffering in silence, while rich families get richer poisoning their water." Something in his voice reminded her of her mother. That quiet strength that came from fighting battles other people never had to face. "What exactly are you proposing?" Kendra asked. "Meet me in Atlanta Monday morning. Let me show you what I've been gathering for 3 decades. Then you decide if you want to help me take down an empire that thinks poor people are disposable." Kendra closed her eyes and thought about Friday night, about Logan's silence, about the laughter that followed her out the door. She thought about her mother's hands, about communities that looked like her hometown, about having a chance to turn her pain into something that mattered. What hurts more, being disrespected by strangers or having the person you love stay silent? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. When Marcus explained why Logan's family's oil company was about to face the biggest scandal in Texas history, Kendra's tears finally stopped. For the first time in 2 days, she smiled. "Tell me everything," she whispered. The same laptop where Logan had shown her their honeymoon plans contained files that would destroy his family's empire, and he'd given her the password. Marcus Davidson's law office sat in downtown Atlanta, wedged between a soul food restaurant and a barbershop that had been serving the community for 40 years. Nothing fancy about the building, but when Kendra walked inside Monday morning, she realized fancy wasn't what won cases, preparation was. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and legal documents. Charts showing cancer rates in rural communities. Satellite images of industrial sites. Court filings dating back decades. It looked like the workspace of someone who'd been fighting a war for 30 years. "Coffee?" Marcus asked, gesturing to a pot that smelled like it had been brewing since dawn. "Please." Kendra accepted the mug, grateful for something to do with her hands. The weekend had been a blur of reporters calling, social media notifications exploding, and friends reaching out with a mixture of support and curiosity. Marcus was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much injustice. He moved through his office like a man on a mission, pulling files and spreading documents across a conference table that had clearly hosted many battles. "Before we begin," he said, settling into his chair, "I need you to understand something. What I'm about to show you will change how you see Logan forever. Are you prepared for that?" Kendra thought about the text message. About 48 hours of silence followed by the weakest apology in history. "I think it already has changed." Marcus nodded and opened the first folder. Davidson Oil Industries has been operating in the South for 70 years. Logan's great-grandfather started the company with money from cotton plantations, but the modern fortune came from something else entirely: environmental crimes that should have put the whole family in prison decades ago. He spread out a series of photographs showing industrial sites, contaminated water, and communities that looked exactly like Kendra's hometown. They've been systematically targeting poor communities, particularly black communities, for their most dangerous operations. Why? Because poor people can't afford lawyers and black voices get ignored by regulatory agencies. The next document made Kendra's stomach turn. It was an internal company memo from 1995, signed by Logan's father, discussing acceptable cancer rate increases in communities near their drilling sites. They knew, she whispered. They knew they were making people sick. Not just knew, planned for it. Look at this. Marcus pulled out another file. Settlement agreements with families whose children developed leukemia. Payments ranging from $50,000 to $200,000, with strict non-disclosure agreements. Kendra flipped through page after page of legal documents, each one representing a family destroyed by corporate greed. Names, addresses, medical records, all cataloged like business expenses. "How do you have all this?" she asked. Marcus smiled grimly. "Because Logan gave it to me." Kendra's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "What? Not intentionally." 3 months ago, he called asking for legal advice about some family business issues. Said he'd heard I was a good lawyer. Didn't realize I was the cousin who'd been cut off for asking too many questions about Daddy's business practices. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up a shared file folder. He gave me access to company documents, thinking I'd help him with some contract negotiations. What he actually gave me was 30 years of evidence showing exactly how Davidson Oil has been poisoning communities across the South. The folder contained hundreds of files. Environmental impact studies, internal communications, financial records showing payments to government officials, and most damning of all, a spreadsheet tracking community health incidents by location and demographic. "Logan's been part of this?" Kendra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "That's the complicated part," Marcus said carefully. "He's been CEO for 3 years, but most of this dates back decades. The question is whether he's actively participating or willfully ignorant. Based on these recent emails, I'd say he's been asking uncomfortable questions that his father doesn't want to answer." Kendra scrolled through the files, seeing Logan's name on dozens of documents. Requests for environmental reviews that were ignored. Questions about community health data that went unanswered. Proposals for cleanup initiatives that were rejected by the board. "He was trying to fix it," she said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe he was trying to cover it up better." The result is the same. Communities are still suffering while Davidson Oil profits. Marcus leaned forward, his voice intense. "Here's what matters. You have a platform now. 2 million people watched you stand up to that family Friday night. Environmental groups, civil rights organizations, federal agencies, they're all paying attention to what you do next." Kendra thought about her mother's stories of getting sick after drinking well water in their hometown. About neighbors who developed cancer at rates that seemed too high to be coincidence. About communities that had been fighting for clean water and safe air while rich families got richer poisoning their environment. "What would this look like?" she asked. "We file a federal lawsuit under the Environmental Justice Act. Class action representing every community that's been harmed by Davidson Oil's practices. We use their own documents as evidence, and we make sure the whole world sees exactly what they've been doing." The weight of the decision settled on Kendra's shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about justice for communities that have been suffering in silence for decades. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved was hiding something that went against everything you stood for? How do you process that betrayal? Share below. As Kendra stared at photos of polluted water in communities that looked exactly like her hometown, Marcus placed a business card on the table. "EPA's lead environmental prosecutor," he said quietly. "She's been waiting 3 years for someone brave enough to go public." The name on the card made Kendra's hand shake. Sarah Chun, the woman who destroyed oil companies twice her size. Sarah Chun looked like she shopped at Target and fought like she'd been born in courtrooms. The perfect combination for taking down men who thought money made them untouchable. The EPA regional office in Charlotte occupied 3 floors of a government building that had seen better decades. Gray carpets, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of institutional furniture that prioritized function over comfort. But when Kendra walked into Sarah Chen's office Thursday morning, she immediately understood why oil executives woke up in cold sweats thinking about this woman. Sarah's desk was organized chaos. Legal briefs stacked with military precision, environmental reports marked with different colored tabs, and a wall covered with what looked like a serial killer's investigation board. Except instead of tracking murders, she was tracking corporate crimes that affected entire communities. "Miss Washington," Sarah said, standing to shake hands. She was smaller than Kendra had expected, maybe 5'4", with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. "I've been following your story since Friday night. Quite a speech. Thank you for meeting with me," Kendra replied, taking the offered chair. "Marcus says you've been building cases against companies like Davidson Oil for years." Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. 23 years, actually. I've taken down 12 major corporations for environmental crimes, secured over $4 billion in settlements for affected communities, and sent 6 executives to federal prison. Davidson Oil has been on my list for 15 years. She pulled out a thick file folder. The problem with cases like this isn't finding evidence. It's finding plaintiffs brave enough to go public. Corporate lawyers are very good at intimidating poor communities into silence. Threats, harassment, economic pressure, legal costs that can bankrupt families. Most people can't afford to fight back. Sarah's office overlooked downtown Charlotte skyline, but her attention focused on satellite images of rural communities where cancer rates spiked near oil drilling sites. Communities that shared something in common with Kendra's hometown. "But you're different," Sarah continued. "You have national attention, public support, and most importantly, you have access to their internal documents through Marcus's family connection. That makes you the most dangerous person Davidson Oil has ever faced." Kendra studied the satellite photos. These communities, how many people are we talking about? Across 5 states? Approximately 47,000 people living within contamination zones. 12,000 documented cases of cancer, respiratory illness, birth defects, and other health problems directly linked to Davidson Oil operations. The numbers hit like physical blows. 47,000 people, 12,000 victims. Also, one family could add more zeros to their bank account. What would a lawsuit actually accomplish? Kendra asked. "Even if we win, how does that help families who've already lost everything?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice passionate. 3 things. First, financial compensation for medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. Second, mandatory cleanup of contaminated sites and relocation assistance for affected families. Third, federal oversight that prevents this from happening again. She pulled out another document. But there's something else. A federal grand jury has been investigating Davidson Oil for environmental crimes for 2 years. They have evidence of bribery, document destruction, and conspiracy to violate federal environmental laws. What they don't have is a high-profile case that forces the Justice Department to act. Kendra felt her pulse quicken. "You're talking about criminal charges. I'm talking about justice. Real justice. Not just civil penalties that rich families write off as business expenses, but actual prison time for executives who poison communities." The weight of responsibility settled on Kendra's shoulders like a heavy coat. This wasn't just about her humiliation or her broken engagement anymore. It was about communities that had been suffering in silence while she'd been planning her wedding. "What happens to Logan in all this?" she asked quietly. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "That depends on what he does next. If he cooperates with federal investigators, testifies truthfully about company practices, and helps us understand the full scope of the contamination, he might avoid criminal charges. If he lies, obstructs justice, or tries to protect his family's crimes." She shrugged. "Then he goes to prison with the rest of them." Kendra thought about Logan's text message, about his weak apology and complete failure to understand what Friday night had really been about. Maybe facing federal prison would finally teach him that some things mattered more than family loyalty. "How long would something like this take?" she asked. "To file the civil lawsuit? 2 weeks. To build the criminal case? 6 months to a year. To actually see justice." Sarah smiled grimly. "However long it takes." I've been waiting 15 years for the right opportunity to destroy Davidson Oil. You're that opportunity. What does justice look like to you? Is it revenge, accountability, or protection for future victims? Drop your thoughts below. Sarah's final question hung in the air like smoke. Are you ready to become the face of this case? Because once we file, Logan's family won't just hate you. They'll try to destroy you. Kendra thought of her mother's calloused hands, of champagne laughter, of silence when she needed protection most. Let them try. While Logan posted vacation photos from Cabo, trying to forget her, Kendra spent 60 days learning how to speak the language that terrified billionaires, federal law. The transformation began with books. Sarah Chun had given Kendra a reading list that would have intimidated law students. Environmental justice and the law, corporate accountability in the modern age, federal prosecution of environmental crimes. Kendra attacked them like her life depended on understanding every word, because in many ways, it did. Her Charlotte apartment became a war room. Legal documents covered every surface. Environmental reports were stacked in careful piles, and her laptop never shut down. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning, read until noon, then spend afternoons on phone calls with affected community members across 5 states. The stories broke her heart and strengthened her resolve in equal measure. There was Margaret Thompson in Mississippi, whose 8-year-old grandson developed leukemia after Davidson Oil began fracking operations 2 miles from their home. The company had offered her $50,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She'd refused and spent her savings fighting for clean water instead. There was Robert Martinez in Louisiana, a shrimp fisherman whose livelihood disappeared when oil spills contaminated the bay where his family had worked for 3 generations. Davidson Oil claimed the contamination came from natural seepage. Internal documents proved they'd been dumping waste in violation of federal law for 15 years. There was Pastor Williams in Alabama, who watched his congregation shrink as families moved away from health problems they couldn't afford to treat. His church sat 3 blocks from a Davidson Oil processing plant that leaked toxic chemicals into the groundwater every time it rained. Each conversation added weight to Kendra's shoulders and fire to her determination. These weren't statistics or legal abstractions. They were families torn apart by corporate greed, communities destroyed by environmental racism, and voices that had been ignored for too long. Sarah introduced her to Dr. Michael Rodriguez, an environmental epidemiologist who'd been documenting the health impacts of oil industry pollution for 20 years. His research formed the scientific backbone of their case, connecting Davidson Oil's operations to specific health problems in affected communities. The pattern is consistent across all their sites, Dr. Rodriguez explained during a video call, his charts and graphs filling Kendra's laptop screen. Higher than normal rates of childhood leukemia, birth defects, respiratory illness, and certain types of cancer. The correlation is so strong that any competent statistician would conclude causation. Marcus Davidson worked 18-hour days building their legal strategy. He'd identified 47 communities across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, where Davidson Oil operations had caused documented environmental damage. Each site required extensive research, witness interviews, and expert analysis. The beauty of this case, Marcus explained over late-night pizza in his office, is that we don't have to prove intent to harm. We just have to prove negligence and environmental damage. Their own internal documents do that for us. But building a federal case required more than evidence. It required allies. Sarah connected Kendra with environmental justice organizations, civil rights groups, and community activists who've been fighting similar battles for decades. The conference room table disappeared under stacks of environmental reports, legal briefs, and photographs that told stories of corporate negligence. Each document a weapon in the war between David and Goliath. Except this time David had law degrees. Kendra learned to speak at community meetings, explaining complex legal concepts in terms that regular people could understand. Her first speech was at a Baptist church in rural Georgia, where 43 families had been affected by contaminated groundwater from a nearby Davidson Oil facility. This isn't about lawyers getting rich or activists making noise. she told the packed sanctuary. This is about families who deserve clean air and safe water. This is about children who shouldn't get sick because their parents can't afford to live somewhere else. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Church collections that had been saving for building repairs donated money to the legal fund instead. Families who'd been afraid to speak out came forward with their stories. Community leaders who'd felt powerless suddenly had hoped that change was possible. Media attention grew steadily. Local news stations covered her speeches. National outlets picked up the story of the runaway bride, who'd become an environmental justice advocate. Social media followers multiplied from thousands to hundreds of thousands as her message spread beyond affected communities to supporters across the country. But the real breakthrough came when Congressman James Washington, no relation despite the shared surname, invited Kendra to testify before the House Environmental Justice Subcommittee. The hearing was scheduled for the same week that would have been her honeymoon with Logan. Federal oversight of environmental crimes has been inadequate for too long, the congressman told her during their preparatory meeting in his Washington office. Corporate polluters treat fines as business expenses because the penalties are too small and prosecution is too rare. Your case could change that. Kendra spent 2 weeks preparing her testimony, working with Sarah and Marcus to craft statements that were both legally precise and emotionally compelling. They practiced in mock hearings, anticipating hostile questions from representatives whose campaigns had been funded by oil industry lobbyists. The night before her testimony, Kendra sat in her hotel room overlooking the Capitol building, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 6 weeks ago, she'd been planning flower arrangements and seating charts for a wedding that would have bound her to a family she now understood was built on environmental crimes. Her phone buzzed with messages of support from communities across the South, from environmental groups, from strangers who'd been following her story. But the message that mattered most was from Pastor Williams in Alabama. You're speaking for all of us tomorrow. Make them hear what they've been ignoring for 30 years. Have you ever had to learn something completely new to fight for what's right? What skill did you develop that surprised even you? Share your transformation story. The morning Kendra's name appeared as lead plaintiff in Chun versus Davidson Oil Industries, her phone exploded with notifications. But it wasn't just news alerts Logan was calling. After 60 days of silence, he finally wanted to talk. She let it ring while staring at the press release that would change everything. The lawsuit filing made national news, but the real shock came when reporters discovered the lead plaintiff was supposed to be Mrs. Logan Davidson in 3 days. Kendra woke up Tuesday morning to 17 missed calls and news vans parked outside her Charlotte apartment like they were covering a presidential scandal. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications from every social media platform, news outlet, and random number imaginable. Environmental lawsuit rocks Texas oil dynasty, read the CNN headline. Former bride-to-be takes on billionaire family, announced Fox News. But it was TMZ that really grabbed attention. Wedding revenge. Jilted woman sues ex-fiancé's family for millions. Sarah Chun called at 7 a.m. sharp. Are you watching the news? Hard to miss when helicopters are circling my building, Kendra replied, peeking through her blinds at the circus below. This is insane. This is exactly what we wanted. Public pressure means they can't make this disappear quietly. Stay inside today. I'm sending a car to bring you to the office through the back entrance. Within hours, social media exploded with support. Hashtag Justice for Kendra started trending, with thousands sharing stories of being dismissed by wealthy families. Environmental groups rallied behind her. Community activists posted pictures from affected neighborhoods. But the Davidson family wasn't staying quiet. Logan's sister Amanda appeared on Good Morning America, her blonde hair perfectly styled, designer suit impeccable. This is nothing but a vindictive attack by a bitter woman who couldn't handle not being accepted into our family, she declared, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. Kendra Washington is using environmental concerns to mask a personal vendetta. It's truly heartbreaking. The host leaned forward. But what about the environmental evidence? Amanda's smile never wavered. Every allegation will be proven false. My family has operated responsibly for generations. This young woman is just looking for a payday after her relationship ended. Kendra watched from Sarah's office, her jaw clenched. She's good at this. She's desperate, Sarah corrected. Notice how she attacked your character instead of addressing the actual evidence? That's not confidence. That's panic. Logan tried calling 47 times that day. Each call went straight to voicemail. By evening, he'd left 6 messages, each one more desperate than the last. Kendra, please pick up. I know you're getting crazy attention right now. I need you to know this isn't what I wanted. Delete. Baby, I'm getting killed in the media. My family's going nuts. Can we please just talk? Delete. I saw Amanda on TV. She doesn't speak for me, okay? She doesn't know what really happened between us. Delete. The 4th message made her pause. I hired my own lawyer, not the family's. My own. I think you might be right about some things. She saved that one. By Wednesday, investigative reporters were digging deeper. A Dallas Morning News journalist called Sarah's office with questions about Davidson Oil's environmental record. A Houston Chronicle reporter requested interviews with community members from affected areas. Even international outlets picked up the story. The family's crisis management team went into overdrive. They released a statement calling the lawsuit baseless and opportunistic. They highlighted their charitable giving and community involvement. They brought out former employees to praise the company's safety record, but every move they made seemed to backfire. When they held a press conference to defend their environmental practices, protesters showed up with pictures of polluted waterways. When they tried to paint Kendra as money-hungry, she announced she'd donate any personal settlement to affected communities. When they suggested she was unstable after a breakup, her college professors and former colleagues lined up to vouch for her character. They're fighting the wrong battle, Sarah explained during their evening strategy session. They're treating this like a public relations problem when it's actually a legal and moral crisis. Thursday brought the first major breakthrough. A former Davidson Oil employee reached out through an environmental whistleblower website. He had pictures, documents, recordings. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to take them on, he told Sarah over the phone. I've got 15 years of evidence they tried to bury. But the real game changer came Friday afternoon. Kendra was reviewing witness statements when Sarah burst into the conference room, holding her phone like it contained gold. You need to hear this. She pressed play on a leaked recording. Logan's father's voice was unmistakable. I don't care what it costs. Find something on the girl. Her mother, her family, her college years. Everyone has secrets. Dig until you find hers. A younger male voice responded. Sir, the environmental evidence is pretty damaging. Maybe we should focus on the actual case instead of. The case is about destroying my son's ex-girlfriend before she destroys us. Make it happen. The recording continued for 3 more minutes, detailing plans to hire private investigators, plant negative stories, and discredit the plaintiff through any means necessary. Kendra stared at the phone as the recording ended. They want to play dirty? It gets better, Sarah said, rewinding to a section they'd missed. Listen to the background conversation. Behind the main discussion, another voice was barely audible. What about the Houston incident? If that comes out during discovery, that stays buried, whatever it takes. Sarah's eyes were bright with excitement. What Houston incident, Kendra? Kendra shook her head. I have no idea. Logan never mentioned anything about Houston problems. Well, Sarah said, already reaching for her laptop. Looks like we're about to find out. Because this recording just gave us probable cause to dig into every skeleton in their closet. As Sarah began typing furiously, pulling up databases and contact lists, Kendra's phone buzzed with yet another call from Logan. This time, she answered. What's the Houston incident? She asked without saying hello. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Logan. What happened to Houston? His voice was barely a whisper. How did you find out about that? Answer the question. Another pause. I can't talk about this over the phone. They're probably listening to everything now. Then you better figure out how to talk about it, because Sarah Chun is about to tear apart your family's entire history, and something tells me Houston is just the beginning. She hung up and looked at Sarah, who was still typing with the intensity of someone who'd found the missing piece of a puzzle. "How bad do you think it is?" Kendra asked. Sarah looked up, her expression serious. "Bad enough that they're willing to destroy you to keep it quiet, which means it's exactly what we need to win." The leaked recording of Logan's father instructing lawyers to dig up dirt on the girl would have been devastating enough, but the background conversation about covering up the Houston incident made Sarah Chin's eyes light up like Christmas morning. "What Houston incident?" Kendra asked. "That," Sarah smiled, "is why we're going to win." Logan's sister called her vindictive trailer trash on live television, not knowing that cameras would catch her family's oil trucks dumping waste in Kendra's childhood neighborhood the very next day. The Amanda Davidson interview on CNN was supposed to be damage control. Instead, it became the moment the family showed their true colors to America. "Let's be honest about what this really is," Amanda said, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing dismissively. "This is vindictive trailer trash, trying to cash in on a relationship that didn't work out. Kendra Washington never belonged in our world, and now she's throwing a tantrum because we wouldn't pretend otherwise." The host, Maria Santos, raised an eyebrow. "That seems like a very personal attack on someone raising legitimate environmental concerns." "Environmental concerns?" Amanda laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Please, this girl's mother cleaned hotel rooms. She grew up in some tiny town nobody's heard of. You think she knows anything about environmental science? This is about money and revenge, nothing more." Back in Charlotte, Kendra watched with Sarah and Marcus in the law office conference room. The words hit like physical blows, but instead of crumbling, she felt something else building inside her chest. Something hot and powerful. "Trailer trash," she repeated quietly. "Don't let her get to you," Sarah said. "This is exactly what we want. Let them show America who they really are." But Kendra wasn't upset. She was calculating. "My mother cleaned those hotel rooms for 18 years, she said, her voice steady. 18 years of scrubbing toilets and changing sheets, so I could go to college. And this woman thinks that makes my mother less than her." The interview continued with Amanda attacking everything from Kendra's education to her appearance at the rehearsal dinner. She walked around that country club like she owned it, but you could tell she didn't belong. The way she held her fork, the way she talked to the staff. Some people just can't rise above their raising. Marcus shook his head. "She's handing us the case on a silver platter." He was right. Within an hour of the interview airing, social media exploded with outrage. #TrailerTrash started trending, but not the way Amanda intended. People shared stories of growing up poor, of parents who worked multiple jobs, of being judged for their backgrounds. Environmental groups posted pictures of Amanda's mansion next to photos of polluted communities. But the real gift came Tuesday morning. Kendra's phone rang at 6 a.m. It was James Watterson, a retired news cameraman from her hometown. "You probably don't remember me, but I knew your mama." His voice was gentle but excited. "I saw that awful woman on TV talking about trailer trash, and it made me so mad I couldn't sleep." "Mr. Watterson, I remember you. You used to film the high school football games." "That's right. Well, I'm freelancing now for Channel 9 out of Charlotte, and yesterday I was driving through your old neighborhood working on a story about industrial pollution. And honey, you're not going to believe what I caught on camera." 20 minutes later, Sarah's office email dinged with a video attachment. The footage was crystal clear. 3 Davidson oil trucks in broad daylight, dumping barrels of dark liquid into the creek that ran behind the elementary school where Kendra had learned to read. The same creek where she caught minnows with her mother on summer afternoons. "Those idiots," Sarah breathed. "They're literally poisoning her childhood while calling her trash on national television." "It's too perfect," Marcus said. "Almost like someone wanted us to find it." Kendra studied the timestamp. This was filmed Monday afternoon, 6 hours after Amanda's interview. The 3 lawyers looked at each other. The irony was impossible to ignore. "We need to verify this immediately," Sarah said. "Get water samples, soil tests, everything." "Already on it," Marcus replied, phone pressed to his ear. "I've got people heading there now." By Wednesday evening, the story had exploded. Every major network ran the footage of Davidson Oil trucks dumping waste in Kendra, Washington's hometown creek, the same day her family called her trash for growing up there. Logan called that night, his voice shattered. "Kendra, I swear to God I didn't know they were dumping there. I didn't know about your hometown. I would never. Your sister knew," Kendra said coldly. "She researched me enough to know where I'm from. She knew exactly what she was saying. Amanda's always been. She gets mean when she's scared." "Scared of what, Logan?" "Scared of being held accountable. Scared of losing everything," he said quietly. "Our whole world is falling apart. The board is talking about removing Dad as CEO. The stock price is tanking. Family friends won't return our calls." Kendra felt a flicker of something. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of pain. Then she remembered her mother's hands, cracked from cleaning chemicals, and the feeling passed. "You had a choice at that rehearsal dinner," she said. "You chose to let them humiliate me rather than defend the woman you claim to love. Now you're all making choices about how to handle the consequences. Choose better this time." Thursday brought more leaked audio, this time of Amanda Davidson on a conference call with the family crisis management team. "I don't care if it makes me look bad. The important thing is making her look worse. Poor people always look guilty of something." The recording had been made after her CNN appearance, proving the family was doubling down on their attack strategy instead of addressing the environmental evidence. Environmental groups organized protests outside Davidson Oil's Houston headquarters. Community leaders from affected areas spoke at press conferences. Legal experts appeared on news shows explaining how the family's public statements could be used against them in court. But the most powerful moment came when Mrs. Dorothy Chun, Sarah's 78-year-old mother, appeared on a local Houston news program. "I've lived in Fifth Ward for 50 years, she said, her voice strong despite her age. "I've watched Davidson Oil poison my community while living in their mansions across town. Now, they want to call that brave young woman trash? The only trash I see is a family that makes money poisoning poor people." The interview went viral within hours. Logan's father took the stand. His lawyer's first question seemed routine. "Did your company knowingly pollute water supplies?" But Logan Sr.'s answer, caught on hot mic during a sidebar, changed everything. "Of course we did. That's what poor neighborhoods are for." The courtroom erupted, but Kendra just smiled. Logan's great-grandfather started Davidson Oil with money from cotton plantations, but the family's modern fortune came from something far more sinister buried in Houston's Fifth Ward. The Harris County Archives building in downtown Houston looked like every other government office. Fluorescent lights, tired carpeting, and the smell of old paper and broken dreams. But to Kendra and Sarah, walking through those doors felt like entering a treasure vault. "Environmental impact studies are public record," Sarah explained as they signed in with the clerk. "Most people don't know that. Most people don't care enough to look." "But we're not most people," Kendra replied, following her through narrow aisles lined with filing cabinets that stretched from floor to ceiling. Sarah had spent 3 days on the phone with Houston city officials, environmental groups, and community leaders, mapping out exactly what they needed to find. The leaked recording mentioning a Houston incident had given them a starting point, but it was Sarah's methodical approach that turned speculation into evidence. "Davidson Oil has been operating in Houston for 60 years, Sarah said, pulling out a thick folder marked 1987 to 1995. "If there's a pattern of environmental violations, it'll be in here." The first folder contained routine inspection reports from the late 80s. Everything looked normal. Standard oil refinery operations. Minor violations corrected promptly. Nothing unusual. The second folder told a different story. "Look at this," Kendra said, pointing to a 1992 environmental impact study. They were planning to expand operations right in the middle of Fifth Ward. Sarah leaned over her shoulder. "A predominantly black neighborhood. Keep reading." The documents revealed that Davidson Oil had purchased 15 residential properties in Fifth Ward, forcing families to relocate so they could build a waste processing facility. The environmental impact study admitted the facility would potentially affect local groundwater and air quality, but concluded the impact would be acceptable within industry standards. "Acceptable for whom?" Kendra muttered, flipping through page after page of technical jargon that basically said poisoning poor people was a reasonable business decision. But it was the third folder that made Sarah gasp. Internal memos from 1994 showed Davidson Oil executives discussing irregularities in waste disposal procedures at the Fifth Ward facility. A company scientist had raised concerns about groundwater contamination. A local doctor had reported unusual cancer rates in the surrounding neighborhood. The company's response was documented in brutal detail. Jesus, Sarah breathed, reading over Kendra's shoulder. They fired the scientist, threatened the doctor's medical license, paid off city inspectors to delay testing. But the most damning evidence was a memo from Logan's father. Dated March 15, 1995, the Fifth Ward situation must be contained at all costs. These people don't have the resources or connections to cause real problems. Continue operations as planned. Kendra felt her hands shaking as she read. These people, he wrote, these people. The cover-up was systematic and thorough. When residents complained about their children getting sick, the company funded a community health study that concluded pollution wasn't a factor. When local activists organized protests, private investigators were hired to find compromising information about community leaders. When families threatened to sue, they were offered small settlements with strict non-disclosure agreements. How many families? Kendra asked, staring at a list of settlement payments. Sarah counted quickly. 43 between 1994 and 2001. Average payout was $12,000. $12,000 to keep quiet about your family being poisoned. And look at this, Sarah said, pulling out another memo. They budgeted $2 million annually for community relations and legal compliance. That's corporate speak for buying silence. They spent 6 hours in the archives, photographing documents and taking notes. By the time they left, the sun was setting over Houston's skyline, casting long shadows across the city where Davidson Oil had been quietly destroying lives for decades. On the drive back to Charlotte, Sarah called her contacts at the EPA and the Justice Department. We need to notify federal authorities about this. The statute of limitations may have passed on some violations, but if there's an ongoing pattern of environmental racism, that's a civil rights issue. But Kendra was thinking about something else. Sarah, what happens to the families who took those settlements? Are they still bound by the non-disclosure agreements? Interesting question. If the company lied about the scope of the damage, or if they covered up evidence that would have changed the family's decisions, those agreements might not be enforceable. They were driving through rural North Carolina when Kendra's phone rang. Logan. This time, she answered. I know you're in Houston, he said without preamble. My dad's lawyers called. They know you were at the archives. Good. I hope they're worried. Kendra, there are things about my family. Things I never knew. Like what? Silence on the line. Then, can I see you when you get back to Charlotte? In person. There are things I can't say over the phone. Why should I trust you? Because I've been doing research too, and what I found out about my own family is going to make you sick. 2 hours later, they met in the parking garage beneath Kendra's apartment building. Logan looked like he hadn't slept in days. His normally perfect hair was messy, his designer clothes wrinkled, his face drawn and tired. They've been lying to me my whole life, he said, handing her a folder. I started digging after the leaked recording. I used my access to company files before they cut me off. The folder contained copies of the same documents Kendra and Sarah had found, plus others, internal emails, financial records, medical reports the company had suppressed. My great-grandfather didn't just start this company with plantation money, Logan said, his voice hollow. He deliberately chose to build in poor black neighborhoods because he knew they couldn't fight back. It wasn't just business. It was strategic racism. Kendra flipped through the documents. Logan, some of these are from last year. This is an ancient history. I know. The Fifth Ward facility is still operating. Still dumping waste. Still making people sick. And my father knows. He's always known. Why are you showing me this? Logan met her eyes for the first time since she'd walked away from their rehearsal dinner. Because you were right. About everything. And because my mother died of cancer when I was 15, and I just found out there's a Davidson oil facility 2 miles from where I grew up. The parking garage was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe my family didn't just poison your community, Kendra. Maybe they poisoned mine too. As Logan handed over the flash drive containing his father's personal files, headlights suddenly flooded the garage. 3 black SUVs surrounded them, and Logan's face went white. "They know," he whispered. "Run." But Kendra had spent 60 days learning to fight instead of flee. Logan's voice was shaking when he called Kendra at 2 a.m. Not to beg forgiveness, but to hand her the weapon that would finish his family once and for all. The black SUVs in the parking garage had been a warning, not an attack. Logan's father and 2 family lawyers, flanked by private security, had simply wanted to have a conversation about family loyalty and legal consequences. "They threatened me for 3 hours," Logan told Kendra over the phone, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said if I testified against the company, they'd destroy me financially, cut me off completely, make sure I never worked in Texas again." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I needed time to think." "But Kendra, I can't keep pretending this is okay. I've been reading medical reports from 5th Ward. Kids with asthma, cancer rates 3 times the national average. Birth defects." Kendra sat up in bed, fully awake now. "Logan, where are you?" "Hotel room in Charlotte. I can't go home. They're having me followed." "Are you safe?" A bitter laugh. "Define safe. My own family just made it clear they'll destroy me if I don't fall in line. But yeah, physically I'm fine. What do you want from me?" Long pause. "I want to do the right thing. Finally. But I'm scared, Kendra. These people, my family, they're not who I thought they were." Kendra looked out her apartment window at the pre-dawn darkness. 6 weeks ago, this man had stood silent while his family humiliated her. Now he was calling in the middle of the night, sounding broken and desperate. "What are you asking me?" "I have access to files they don't know I copied. Financial records showing exactly how much they've spent covering up environmental damage. Internal emails going back 15 years. Medical studies they buried. And what? Phone recordings. My dad recorded conversations with city officials, EPA inspectors, community leaders. He kept everything as insurance, in case anyone tried to double-cross him." Kendra's heart started racing. "Logan, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I can give you everything. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence you need to destroy them completely. But I need to know you'll protect me. Because once I do this, there's no going back." "Why now? Why are you willing to do this now?" Another pause. "Because I listened to one of those recordings tonight. It's my father talking to a Houston city councilman in 2019. They're discussing a proposal to build a new elementary school in 5th Ward. And my father is explaining why the location needs to change." "Why?" Logan's voice cracked. "Because the soil contamination is so bad that kids playing on that ground would be exposed to carcinogenic chemicals. But instead of cleaning it up, he just wanted the school moved. And when the councilman suggested Davidson Oil should pay for environmental remediation, my father laughed and said, 'Why would we pay to fix something that's working exactly as designed?'" Kendra felt sick. Working as designed. The pollution wasn't an accident, Kendra. It was deliberate. My family has been using poor black neighborhoods as dumping grounds for decades, knowing exactly what it would do to the people living there. The weight of what Logan was offering hit her all at once. This wasn't just evidence of corporate negligence. This was proof of intentional environmental racism spanning generations. "What do you need from me?" "Meet me tomorrow. Bring Sarah. I'll give you everything I have, but I need guarantees that you'll help me get into witness protection. Because once this comes out, my family won't just cut me off financially. They'll what?" "My dad told me tonight that family loyalty isn't optional. That some secrets are worth killing to protect." "Logan, you don't really think. My mother didn't just die of cancer, Kendra. She died asking questions about why so many of our neighbors were getting sick. And 2 weeks before she died, she told me she was going to call the EPA about the facility near our house." The line went quiet except for Logan's unsteady breathing. "I'll call Sarah in the morning," Kendra said. "We'll figure out how to keep you safe. There's something else. The Houston files you found yesterday? That's not the only cover-up. There are facilities in Louisiana, Oklahoma, North Carolina, all in poor communities, all deliberately placed to avoid scrutiny. How many communities? Dozens, maybe hundreds. This isn't just about Houston or Fifth Ward. My family has been systematically poisoning poor people across the South for 40 years. Kendra closed her eyes, trying to process the scope of what Logan was describing. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was exposing a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for decades. Logan, I need you to be sure about this. Once you testify, once this evidence comes out, your entire life changes. You'll never be able to go back. Good, he said, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice sounded strong. I don't want to go back. I want to be someone my mother would have been proud of. They arranged to meet the next evening at Sarah's office. Logan would bring the files, recordings, and everything else he'd copied. Sarah would contact the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and the Justice Department's Environmental Enforcement Section. Kendra, yeah, thank you for fighting this, for not letting them bury it like they buried everything else. Thank you for finally choosing the right side. After hanging up, Kendra sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about the magnitude of what was about to happen. In a few hours, she would have evidence that could bring down not just Davidson Oil, but potentially trigger the largest environmental justice investigation in U.S. history. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Some conversations aren't as private as people think. Be careful who you trust. She screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Sarah immediately, then double-checked her door locks and closed all her blinds. Outside, a car engine started in the parking lot, but when she looked out the window, the lot was empty. As Logan sat in his penthouse, staring at Houston's skyline, the same skyline that hid his family's victims in the shadows below. He made a decision that would either save his soul or destroy his world. He picked up the phone and dialed the one number he'd been forbidden to call. The Davidson family hired the same crisis management firm that defended tobacco companies in oil spills, but they'd never faced a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The war room at Blackstone Crisis Management looked like something from a political thriller. Wall-mounted screens showing news feeds, social media sentiment analysis, and stock price charts that painted a grim picture for Davidson Oil. Around the polished conference table sat the kind of people who made careers out of protecting the reputations of companies that poisoned children for profit. The Washington girl is a problem, announced Victoria Sterling, the firm's founder and CEO. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her tailored suit expensive enough to fund a small town's annual budget. She's articulate, sympathetic, and worst of all, she's telling the truth. Logan's father, Richard Davidson, looked older than his 62 years. The stress of the past 2 weeks had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his normally perfect appearance seemed frayed at the edges. What's your recommendation? Total warfare, Victoria replied without hesitation. We destroy her credibility, her character, and her ability to maintain public sympathy. We make this about a bitter ex-girlfriend seeking revenge, not environmental justice. We tried that. It backfired. Victoria smiled coldly. Because you were playing defense. It's time to play offense. She clicked her remote, and Kendra's college ID photo appeared on the main screen. Young, smiling, optimistic. Kendra Washington, 28 years old, environmental science degree from UNC Charlotte. No significant legal experience. No major activism background. She's David fighting Goliath, which makes her dangerous. But David only wins if Goliath plays fair. The next slide showed a detailed timeline of Kendra's life, family background, education, employment history, relationships, social media posts going back years. Everyone has secrets, Victoria continued. Everyone has mistakes they'd rather forget. Everyone has something they're ashamed of. We find hers. What about the environmental evidence? Asked James Morrison, the family's longtime attorney. The documents Logan provided them are damaging. Documents can be questioned. Chain of custody can be challenged. Expert witnesses can be discredited. But public opinion? That's harder to manipulate once it's set. which is why we need to shift the narrative immediately. Victoria clicked to the next slide. A comprehensive media strategy that made Kendra's stomach turn when she read about it later in leaked emails. Phase 1. Discredit the messenger. We plant stories questioning her motives, her qualifications, her mental stability after the breakup. Anonymous sources close to the family will suggest she was always unstable, jealous, manipulative. Phase 2. Overwhelm the evidence. We flood the media with our own environmental studies, our own expert witnesses, our own community testimonials. Make it impossible for the average person to know what's true. Phase 3. Legal intimidation. We sue her personally for defamation, harassment, corporate espionage. Make this so expensive and time-consuming that she runs out of money and energy to fight. Richard Davidson nodded slowly. What about Logan? Victoria's expression hardened. Your son is a traitor who's chosen his ex-girlfriend over his family. He needs to understand there are consequences for betrayal. He's my son. He's a liability, and liabilities get handled. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, planning a campaign of destruction that would make corporate warfare look like a playground dispute. Private investigators were hired to dig into every aspect of Kendra's life. Opposition researchers were tasked with finding dirt on Sarah Chun and her legal team. Media contacts were activated to plant negative stories. But the Davidsons had underestimated their opponent. Sarah Chun had been expecting exactly this kind of response. She'd fought powerful corporations before, and she knew they always followed the same playbook when backed into a corner: attack, discredit, overwhelm. They're going to come at you hard, she warned Kendra during their emergency meeting Wednesday morning. Everything you've ever done, said, or posted online will be scrutinized. Every relationship, every mistake, every moment of poor judgment will be weaponized against you. What about Logan? Is he safe? That's what worries me most. Corporate families like the Davidsons don't just disinherit rebellious children. They destroy them. That afternoon, the first attack came in the form of an anonymous tip to a Houston gossip blogger. Environmental activist Kendra Washington has history of mental health issues and vindictive behavior toward ex-boyfriends. The post claimed that Kendra had been hospitalized for depression in college, false. Had stalked a previous ex-boyfriend, false. And had been heard threatening to make Logan pay at a Charlotte bar the night after their rehearsal dinner, completely fabricated. Within hours, the story was picked up by larger outlets, each one adding their own speculation and anonymous sources. By evening news, Kendra was being described as emotionally unstable and possibly delusional. This is just the beginning, Sarah warned, watching the coverage from her office. Tomorrow will be worse. She was right. Thursday brought a coordinated assault across multiple fronts. A Davidson oil-funded environmental consulting firm released a study claiming their facilities actually improved local water quality. 3 former UNC Charlotte professors who'd received Davidson family donations to their research questioned Kendra's academic credentials in a joint letter to the editor. A private investigator approached Kendra's former co-workers with offers of money for negative information about her character. But the most vicious attack came from an unexpected source. Logan's ex-girlfriend from college, Brittany Chun, no relation to Sarah, appeared on a Dallas morning show with a story about Kendra that was devastating in its calculated cruelty. I've known Logan Davidson for years, Brittany said, looking perfectly composed in a pastel blue dress that screamed trustworthy. And I have to say, I'm not surprised Kendra is doing this. She was always jealous of his family's success, always making comments about how she deserved better. The host leaned forward. Can you give us specific examples? Well, she used to joke about how she was going to make them pay for looking down on her. She said she was going to take them for everything they're worth once she married Logan. I thought she was just venting, but now. Brittany trailed off, shaking her head sadly. I think she always planned this. I think the whole relationship was about getting close enough to hurt them. Kendra watched the interview from Sarah's office, her hands clenched into fists. Every word of that is a lie. I never even met that woman. Of course it's a lie, Sarah replied calmly. But it's a well-constructed lie delivered by a credible-looking witness. This is exactly what I expected. How is she credible? She's Logan's ex, which makes her seem like an unbiased source who's reluctantly coming forward with uncomfortable truth. It's brilliant, actually. Evil, but brilliant. By Friday, the media narrative had shifted dramatically. Instead of David versus Goliath, the story became unstable ex-girlfriend versus grieving family. Social media sentiment analysis showed public support for Kendra dropping from 78% to 45% in 3 days. But Sarah Chun had been playing this game longer than the Davidsons realized. Time for our response, Sarah announced, walking into the conference room where Kendra, Marcus, and 3 federal investigators were waiting. They want to play dirty? Let's show them what dirty really looks like. She placed a tablet on the conference table and pressed play. The room filled with Richard Davidson's voice. Of course, we knowingly polluted water supplies. That's what poor neighborhoods are for. The recording had been captured during a sidebar conversation at a Davidson oil board meeting just 2 days earlier. One of Logan's flash drives that contained not just historical documents, but access codes to the company's internal security system. How did you? Marcus started. Logan gave us more than documents, Sarah explained. He gave us real-time access to their communications. Every phone call, every email, every private meeting. They've been planning our destruction while we've been recording their confessions. Federal Agent Patricia Williams looked impressed. Is this admissible? Logan had authorized access when he downloaded it. Everything on those drives is legally obtained evidence. Kendra stared at the tablet. They really think poor people are disposable. They don't just think it, Sarah replied. They've built their entire business model around it. But now we have proof. She pulled up another file. Internal communications from the crisis management firm detailing their strategy to destroy Kendra's reputation. Victoria Sterling's team has been careless with their emails, Sarah continued. Turns out they were so focused on attacking you, they forgot to secure their own communications. We have everything. The payments to fake witnesses, the planted stories, the coordination with Davidson Oil executives. The room was silent as everyone processed the implications. This changes the entire case, Agent Williams said finally. We're not just looking at environmental violations anymore. This is conspiracy, witness tampering, defamation. This could bring down the entire family. And everyone who helped them, Sarah added, including some very prominent politicians and business leaders who've been taking Davidson money for years. Kendra felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. 6 weeks ago, she'd been planning a wedding. Now she was sitting in a room with federal agents planning the destruction of one of Texas's most powerful families. What happens next? She asked. Sarah smiled for the first time in days. Now we go public with everything, but not the way they expect. Monday morning, Kendra Washington appeared on every major network simultaneously. Not as a defendant responding to attacks, but as a federal whistleblower backed by the full weight of the U.S. government. The coordinated interviews revealed not just the Davidson Oil environmental crimes, but the entire apparatus of corruption that had protected them for decades. City officials who'd taken bribes, EPA inspectors who'd falsified reports, judges who dismissed cases without proper review. But the most shocking revelation came when Kendra played the recording of Richard Davidson's Poor Neighborhoods comment during her live CNN interview. The anchor's face went white. Mr. Davidson actually said that. He said it 2 days ago, Kendra replied calmly, while his crisis management team was on television calling me mentally unstable. Apparently, the only thing unstable about this situation is a company that thinks poisoning children is good business. Within hours, Davidson Oil's stock price crashed. The Texas Attorney General announced a criminal investigation. The EPA launched emergency inspections of every Davidson Oil facility in the country. And in a Houston hotel room, Logan Davidson watched his family's empire crumble on live television, finally understanding what courage looked like. The Davidson family hired the same crisis management firm that defended tobacco companies in oil spills, but they'd never faced a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. By the end of the week, That crisis management firm was facing their own federal investigation for conspiracy and witness tampering. Judge Patricia Williams, a black woman who'd grown up in Houston's Fifth Ward, was assigned to hear the case. When the Davidson lawyers filed for her recusal, her response made headlines. "I'll recuse myself when oil companies stop poisoning my people." The war was no longer just legal. It was personal. The trial started on a Tuesday that felt like revolution. Cameras rolling as a young black woman from North Carolina prepared to dismantle an oil dynasty that had ruled Texas for a century. The Bob Casey Federal Courthouse in Houston buzzed with an energy that bailiffs said they'd never experienced. Media trucks lined the streets for blocks. Environmental activists held vigil on the courthouse steps. Community members from affected neighborhoods traveled from across the South to witness what many were calling the environmental trial of the century. Inside courtroom 7A, Judge Patricia Williams commanded attention without saying a word. At 54, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd fought for everything she'd achieved. Her presence seemed to fill the massive courtroom, making even the ornate ceilings seem smaller. "This court will hear the case of Chun versus Davidson Oil Industries," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I want to be clear from the start. This trial will focus on facts, evidence, and law. Not personalities, not family drama, not social media campaigns." The Davidson legal team, led by Thomas Hartwell of Houston's most expensive law firm, occupied 3 full tables. 12 lawyers in identical Navy suits, each one costing more per hour than most people made in a month. Behind them sat Richard Davidson, looking every one of his 62 years, flanked by what remained of his family and board of directors. On the other side of the courtroom, Sarah Chun sat with just 3 people: Kendra, Marcus Davidson, and a young environmental scientist named Dr. Angela Foster, who'd volunteered her expertise after watching the news coverage. The contrast was deliberate and powerful. "Your Honor," Thomas Hartwell began during opening statements, "this case is about a young woman's desire for revenge disguised as environmental activism. The plaintiff seeks to destroy a century-old Texas business because her personal relationship ended poorly." He was smooth, confident, gesturing toward Kendra with practiced dismissal. Kendra Washington is not an environmental scientist. She's not a legal expert. She's not even a Texas resident. She's a spurned woman using federal courts to settle a personal score. Scattered murmurs rippled through the gallery, mostly from Davidson Oil supporters who'd filled the first 3 rows. "Davidson Oil has operated responsibly for 4 generations," Hartwell continued. "We've created jobs, supported communities, and followed all applicable regulations. What we have not done is commit the environmental crimes alleged in this baseless lawsuit." He spoke for 45 minutes, painting Kendra as vindictive and Davidson Oil as a victim of modern politics and environmental extremism. Then Sarah Chun stood up. She walked to the center of the courtroom without notes, without slides, without any of the theatrical props Hartwell had used. Just a woman in a simple black suit, speaking directly to 12 jurors who looked like the communities Davidson Oil had poisoned for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about one simple question. Do corporations have a right to poison poor people for profit?" The silence in the courtroom was complete. "Over the next 2 weeks, we will show you documents proving Davidson Oil deliberately chose to build waste facilities in low-income communities because they knew these families couldn't fight back. We will play recordings of company executives laughing about cancer rates in neighborhoods they contaminated. We will present medical evidence linking Davidson Oil's operations to birth defects, respiratory illness, and premature death." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Mr. Hartwell wants you to believe this is about a broken relationship, but I ask you to listen to the voices of the hundreds of families who've been broken by Davidson Oil's deliberate environmental racism. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice that's 50 years overdue." Sarah spoke for only 15 minutes, but when she sat down, the energy in the room had shifted completely. Judge Williams called the first witness. The government calls Dr. Michael Rodriguez, former Davidson Oil environmental compliance officer. Dr. Rodriguez had worked for Davidson Oil for 12 years before quitting in disgust. His testimony was devastating and specific. "I repeatedly raised concerns about illegal dumping at the Fifth Ward facility," he testified, his voice steady but haunted. "I documented contamination levels that exceeded federal limits by up to 400%. I recommended immediate remediation." What was the company's response? Sarah asked. "Richard Davidson personally told me that cleanup costs would hurt quarterly profits. He said, and I quote, 'Those people have been drinking that water for years. A little more won't kill them.'" The gallery erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Judge Williams gavelled for order. "Did you document this conversation?" "Yes. I recorded it because I couldn't believe what I was hearing." Sarah played the recording. Richard Davidson's voice filled the courtroom with casual cruelty that made several jurors visibly flinch. The defense's cross-examination was brutal but ineffective. They attacked Dr. Rodriguez's credibility, his motives for quitting, even his personal life. But they couldn't dispute the recordings or the documented evidence. The second witness was Maria Santos, a 60-year-old grandmother from Fifth Ward whose house sat directly across from a Davidson oil waste facility. "My grandson was born with lung problems," she testified through tears. "The doctors couldn't explain it, so it must be genetic. But none of my family ever had breathing problems before we moved to that house." "When did your grandson's symptoms begin?" Sarah asked gently. 2 months after Davidson Oil started operating the new facility. Same time 3 other babies on our street started having problems. The defense objected repeatedly, arguing medical testimony from non-experts shouldn't be allowed. But Judge Williams overruled them each time. "This woman has lived with the consequences of the defendant's actions," she ruled. "She is standing to describe those consequences." Maria's testimony lasted 2 hours. By the end, half the jury was crying with her. Day 2 brought Logan Davidson to the witness stand. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity as Logan raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. He looked nothing like the confident oil heir who'd stood at that rehearsal dinner 8 weeks earlier. His face was gaunt, his hands shook slightly, and when he looked toward his father, Richard Davidson refused to meet his eyes. "Mr. Davidson," Sarah began, "you had access to your family's company files for most of your adult life. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And in reviewing those files, what did you discover about Davidson Oil's environmental practices?" Logan took a deep breath. "I discovered that my family has been deliberately poisoning communities for decades, and that they've covered it up through bribery, intimidation, and fraud." The courtroom exploded. Judge Williams called for a 15-minute recess to restore order. When testimony resumed, Logan provided details that even Sarah hadn't expected. Secret bank accounts used to pay off inspectors. Private investigators hired to intimidate witnesses. Medical studies showing cancer links that were buried in company safes. "Why are you testifying against your own family?" Thomas Hartwell asked during cross-examination. Logan looked directly at his father for the first time during the trial. "Because family isn't supposed to be about protecting evil. It's supposed to be about doing what's right." Richard Davidson's face was stone, but his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had turned white. The third day brought the most damaging evidence yet. Internal emails between Richard Davidson and Houston city officials discussing how to manage the optics of childhood leukemia clusters near Davidson Oil facilities. "The key is controlling the narrative," one email read. "Frame it as a coincidence, not contamination. Blame genetics, lifestyle factors, anything except our operations." Another email, sent just 6 months earlier, discussed plans to demolish contaminated houses and build a shopping center to eliminate evidence and generate positive community development stories. By the end of the first week, legal experts on every news channel were calling the case a disaster for Davidson Oil. Stock prices had fallen 78%. Federal agencies had launched criminal investigations. Community groups were organizing protests outside Davidson Oil facilities nationwide. But Thomas Hartwell wasn't finished fighting. "Your Honor," he announced Friday afternoon, "the defense has new evidence that completely changes this case." evidence that proves Ms. Washington has been coordinating with environmental extremists to fabricate evidence against my client. He held up a folder like it contained gold. We request an emergency hearing to present this evidence before the trial continues. Judge Williams looked skeptical. What kind of evidence, Mr. Hartwell? Communications proving this entire lawsuit is part of a coordinated attack by radical environmental groups who've been planning to destroy Davidson Oil for years. Communications that show Ms. Washington was recruited specifically because of her relationship with Logan Davidson. Kendra felt her blood freeze. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her hand found Kendra's under the table and squeezed tight. We'll hear this evidence Monday morning, Judge Williams ruled. But I warn you, Mr. Hartwell, if you're wasting this court's time with conspiracy theories, there will be consequences. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah leaned close to Kendra's ear. Whatever they think they have, we'll handle it. But Kendra was staring at Richard Davidson as he walked past their table. He paused just long enough to whisper 4 words that made her heart stop. Game over, trailer trash. When Logan's father took the stand, his lawyer's first question seemed routine. Did your company knowingly pollute water supplies? But Logan Sr.'s answer, caught on hot mic during a sidebar, changed everything. Of course we did. That's what poor neighborhoods are for. The courtroom erupted, but Kendra just smiled. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, the same amount of time Logan's family had spent at their rehearsal dinner making jokes about Kendra's mother. Monday morning's emergency hearing had been Thomas Hartwell's last desperate attempt to save his clients. The new evidence turned out to be fabricated emails created by the same crisis management firm that was now under federal investigation. When FBI cybercrimes experts testified that the metadata showed the documents were created after the trial began, Judge Williams held the entire defense team in contempt. This court has witnessed an attempt to obstruct justice through document fabrication, she declared, her voice cold with controlled fury. Mr. Hartwell, your clients will face additional federal charges for this behavior. The manufactured evidence, scandal-dominated news coverage, and destroyed whatever credibility Davidson Oil had left with the jury. By Tuesday, the defense had essentially collapsed. Richard Davidson refused to testify on his own behalf. Company executives took the Fifth Amendment when called to the stand. The few witnesses Hartwell managed to present were quickly discredited by Sarah's cross-examinations. Wednesday brought closing arguments. Thomas Hartwell gave it one final try, arguing that Davidson Oil was being unfairly targeted by environmental activists and federal overreach. His voice lacked conviction. His arguments sounded hollow, and he concluded after just 23 minutes. Sarah Chun used her full 2 hours. She walked the jury through 50 years of documented environmental racism. She played recordings of Richard Davidson's most damning statements. She presented medical evidence linking Davidson Oil's facilities to cancer, birth defects, and respiratory illness in dozens of communities. But her most powerful moment came when she brought Maria Santos back to the stand, not to testify, but simply to hold her 6-year-old grandson's breathing mask while Sarah read the names of 47 children who died from illnesses linked to Davidson Oil facilities. This little boy needs a machine to breathe because Richard Davidson decided that quarterly profits mattered more than children's lives, Sarah said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. How many more children have to suffer before we say enough? The jury retired at 2:17 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. Kendra spent those 6 hours in a conference room down the hall from the courtroom, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything except the clock on the wall. Logan sat in the hallway outside, having been banned from the Davidson Oil side of the courtroom by his own family. Sarah tried to manage expectations. Jury deliberations are unpredictable. 6 hours could mean anything. But Marcus had been watching the jurors' faces throughout the trial. They made their decision days ago, he said quietly. They're just being thorough because they know the whole country is watching. At 8:23 p.m., the bailiff knocked on the conference room door. Juries reached a verdict. The walk back to the courtroom felt like a mile. News crews had multiplied during the deliberation. Every major network, international outlets, documentary filmmakers. The courthouse steps were packed with supporters, protesters, and community members who traveled from across the country. Inside courtroom 7A, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Every seat was filled. Judge Williams entered, followed by the 12 jurors who'd held Davidson Oil's fate in their hands for 6 hours. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Williams asked. The foreperson, a retired teacher from Houston's 3rd Ward, stood up. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of willful environmental contamination. How do you find? Guilty. The courtroom erupted, but the foreperson wasn't finished. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud federal environmental agencies, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations through environmental racism, how do you find? Guilty. Each verdict hit like a physical blow to the Davidson family table. Richard Davidson sat motionless, his face gray and lifeless. Around him, lawyers frantically took notes and whispered about appeals. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. This court finds Davidson Oil Industries liable for compensatory damages in the amount of $2.3 billion to affected communities. Additionally, this court imposes punitive damages of $4.7 billion, bringing the total judgment to $7 billion. The number was staggering, larger than many states' annual budgets, enough to bankrupt Davidson Oil completely and fund environmental restoration for decades. But Judge Williams still had more say. Furthermore, this court orders the immediate closure of all Davidson Oil facilities pending comprehensive environmental remediation. The company's assets will be placed in federal receivership to ensure victims are compensated and contaminated sites are properly cleaned. Richard Davidson stood up, his legs shaking. Your Honor, my family has operated in Texas for a century. Your family has poisoned Texas for a century. Judge Williams cut him off. That ends today. Outside the courthouse, the steps had become a celebration. Community leaders who'd fought Davidson Oil for decades embraced each other and cried. Environmental activists chanted and held signs. News reporters interviewed anyone willing to speak. Kendra stood at the microphone set up on the courthouse steps, looking out at hundreds of faces. Some she recognized from affected communities, others she'd never seen before, but who'd followed the case because it represented something larger than one company or one lawsuit. This victory doesn't belong to me, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. It belongs to every community that refused to accept poisoned water as normal. It belongs to every parent who demanded answers about their sick children. It belongs to every person who stood up when powerful people tried to stay silent. The crowd cheered, but Kendra wasn't finished. $7 billion is a lot of money, but it can't bring back the people we lost. It can't cure the children who are already sick. What it can do is make sure this never happens again. And that's exactly what we're going to do with it. Behind her, Sarah Chun watched with pride as her protege addressed the nation. 6 weeks earlier, Kendra had been a heartbroken woman walking away from a wedding. Now she was a leader who'd just brought down one of America's most powerful corporations. As the crowd dispersed and the media packed up their equipment, Logan approached Kendra for the first time since the trial began. I know nothing I say can fix what my family did, he said quietly, but thank you for giving me the chance to finally do the right thing. Kendra looked at him. This man who'd once been her whole world, now just someone who'd learned too late what courage meant. Your testimony saved lives, Logan. That matters. What happens now? Now we rebuild. The communities your family destroyed, the lives your family ruined, the trust your family broke. It's going to take years, maybe decades, but we're going to do it. As Logan walked away, disappearing into the Houston night, Kendra felt her phone buzz. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your victory. We have a job offer that might interest you. Administrator Janet Collins, EPA. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, the same amount of time Logan's family had spent at their rehearsal dinner making jokes about Kendra's mother. But their verdict would echo for generations. Justice finally served, with a price tag that would bankrupt evil and fund hope. 6 months after walking away from a wedding, Kendra walked into the EPA's Washington headquarters as the youngest regional administrator in the agency's history. The Robert F. Kennedy Federal Building rose 12 stories above downtown D.C., its limestone facade weathered by decades of political battles and bureaucratic wars. Inside, the hallways hummed with the quiet energy of government work. Researchers analyzing data, lawyers drafting regulations, administrators coordinating with field offices across the country. For Kendra, walking through those halls felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. The Southeast Regional Administrator position oversees environmental enforcement in 9 states. Administrator Janet Collins explained as she led Kendra through the executive floor. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. 47 million people, some of the country's most polluted communities. They stopped at a corner office with windows overlooking the Potomac River. The nameplate on the door read, Kendra Washington, Regional Administrator. "This is really happening," Kendra whispered, running her fingers across the brass nameplate. "The Senate confirmed your nomination unanimously," Janet smiled. "Turns out taking down Davidson Oil is excellent qualification for this job." The confirmation hearings have been surprisingly smooth. Even Republican senators who typically opposed environmental regulations found it difficult to argue against someone who'd exposed decades of corporate environmental crimes. The Davidson Oil case had become a symbol of what happened when companies thought they were above the law. "What's my first priority?" Kendra asked, settling into the chair behind a desk that felt both too big and exactly right. "Houston," Janet replied without hesitation. The Davidson Oil cleanup is the largest environmental remediation project in U.S. history. $7 billion needs to be spent wisely, and those communities need to see results fast. Over the next 3 months, Kendra threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd brought to preparing for the trial. She traveled to affected communities, meeting with residents who'd suffered from Davidson Oil's pollution for decades. She coordinated with scientists, engineers, and public health experts to design cleanup plans that would actually restore damaged environments instead of just meeting minimum legal requirements. The work was exhausting, complex, and deeply personal. In Fifth Ward, she stood in the yard of the house where Dorothy Chun had lived for 50 years, watching EPA contractors remove contaminated soil that had poisoned 3 generations of children. "My granddaughter Sarah told me you'd make things right," Dorothy said, her voice strong despite her 78 years. "I didn't believe her at first. Too many promises been broken in this neighborhood." "What changed your mind?" Kendra asked. Dorothy smiled. "You came here yourself. Didn't send some assistant or some consultant. You came to see what we've been living with. That told me you were different." In rural North Carolina, Kendra visited the creek behind her old elementary school. The same creek where Davidson oil trucks had been caught dumping waste on camera. Now, instead of dark chemical slicks, the water ran clear. Fish were beginning to return. Children could play safely again. "Mama would have loved this," she whispered, standing on the bank where she'd caught minnows as a child. But the most meaningful moment came during a community meeting in a Houston church basement, surrounded by families who'd lost loved ones to Davidson Oil's pollution. "Ms. Washington," asked James Rodriguez, whose wife had died of cancer at 34, "how do we know this won't happen again? How do we know some other company won't just take Davidson's place?" Kendra had been waiting for this question. It was the most important question anyone could ask. "Because we're not just cleaning up the mess," she replied. "We're changing the rules. New federal guidelines that make what Davidson Oil did impossible. Real-time monitoring systems that communities can access directly. Whistleblower protections that actually protect people who speak up." She pulled out her tablet and showed them the legislation she'd been working on with Congress. The Environmental Justice Act, named for her mother. The Viola Washington Environmental Justice Act will require companies to get community approval before building facilities in residential areas. It will mandate health impact studies that can't be hidden or ignored. And it will give communities the legal tools to shut down companies that poison them. The room was silent as families processed what she was telling them. "You mean," said Maria Santos, the grandmother who testified at the trial, "My grandson won't have to worry about some company poisoning his children." That's exactly what I mean. The applause started slow, then built until the small church basement sounded like a stadium. But Kendra's greatest challenge wasn't technical or political, it was personal. Logan had tried to contact her several times since the trial ended. Letters, emails, phone calls that she'd ignored. She'd built a new life around the mission of environmental justice, and she didn't want reminders of the past to complicate her focus. Then one morning, her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about the Davidson oil cleanup." "Who is it?" "Logan Davidson. But he says he's not here about personal matters. Says he has information about contamination sites the EPA doesn't know about." Kendra's first instinct was to refuse the meeting, but her job was bigger than her personal feelings. "Send him in." Logan looked different than he had at the trial. Thinner, older, wearing clothes that weren't designer expensive. He carried a briefcase that was battered and practical rather than sleek and impressive. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, sitting across from her desk like any other visitor seeking EPA assistance. "What information do you have?" Logan opened the briefcase and removed a stack of documents. "After the company went into federal receivership, I've been going through family properties. Old warehouses, abandoned facilities, properties in shell company names." He placed photographs on her desk, barrels of chemicals stored in unmarked buildings, contaminated groundwater under parking lots, waste buried in locations that weren't on any official company records. There are dozens of sites across Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi that never made it onto EPA cleanup lists because they were kept off the books. Some of this contamination is from the 1960s. Kendra studied the evidence. If Logan was right, the Davidson oil environmental crime was even larger than anyone had realized. Why bring this to me? Why not directly to the federal prosecutors? Logan met her eyes for the first time since entering the office. "Because you're the only person I trust to make sure it gets handled right. The communities, the families. You'll make sure they're protected." They worked together for 3 hours, mapping contamination sites and identifying affected communities. It was professional, focused, and strangely healing. "Logan," Kendra said as he prepared to leave, "what are you doing now? How are you living?" "I got a job with an environmental consulting firm in Austin. Entry level, but it's honest work. I'm learning how to clean up messes instead of making them." "And your family?" "My father's in federal prison awaiting trial. My sister won't speak to me. The cousins and uncles all blame me for destroying the family business." He shrugged. "But I sleep at night now. That's worth something." As Logan reached the door, he turned back. "Kendra, your mother would be proud of what you've built here." After he left, Kendra sat in her office as the sun set over Washington, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. A broken engagement had become environmental justice. Personal betrayal had become public service. Heartbreak had become hope for millions of people. Her phone rang. Sarah Chun, calling from Charlotte. "How's the most powerful environmental regulator in the Southeast doing?" "I'm good, Sarah. Really good. We're about to get funding for the Viola Washington Environmental Justice Act. Your mama's name on federal law. That's something special. It's everything, Sarah. It's absolutely everything." 6 months after walking away from a wedding, Kendra walked into the EPA's Washington headquarters as the youngest regional administrator in the agency's history. And for the first time since that rehearsal dinner, she knew exactly where she belonged. Logan's second text contained an address in North Carolina and 4 words that stopped her heart. "Your mother would be proud." 2 years had passed since the trial that changed everything. Davidson Oil was gone, bankrupt and dissolved. Richard Davidson was serving 15 years in federal prison. The affected communities were healing with clean water and soil for the first time in decades. Kendra had become a national figure in environmental justice, testifying before Congress, advising other EPA regions, and speaking at universities across the country. Her work was meaningful, impactful, and deeply satisfying. So why was she sitting in her rental car outside her childhood neighborhood at 7 in the morning, staring at a text from the man who'd broken her heart? The address Logan had sent was where her mother's house used to stand. The old neighborhood had been transformed during the Davidson oil cleanup. Contaminated houses demolished, soil replaced, new community centers and parks built where industrial waste had once poisoned the ground. Where Viola Washington's small house had been, there was now a gleaming health clinic with a sign that made Kendra's eyes fill with tears. Viola Washington Community Health Center. I figured you'd want to see it in person. Logan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him walking across the parking lot, wearing work boots and a volunteer t-shirt from the local environmental restoration project. He looked good, healthier than he had during the trial, his face tanned from outdoor work, his expression peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. You build a health clinic on my mother's land? The EPA built it, he corrected gently. I just helped with the construction. Been volunteering here for 8 months. They stood together looking at the building where children from the community could now receive health care without worrying about contaminated drinking water or air pollution. Why here? Kendra asked. Because this is where everything started. Where your mother worked those extra shifts to send you to college. Where you learned that some fights are worth having. It seemed like the right place for healing. They walked around the clinic together, Logan explaining the solar panels, the air filtration systems, the community garden where vegetables grew in clean soil for the first time in 30 years. The irony isn't lost on me, he said as they sat on a bench overlooking the garden. My family poisoned this place for decades, and now I'm trying to help fix it. Is that what this is? Penance. Logan was quiet for a long moment. Maybe it started that way, but it's become something more. I like the work. I like feeling useful instead of just ornamental. And your family? My father writes me letters from prison, mostly about how I betrayed the family legacy. My sister still blames me for everything. The extended family treats me like I'm dead. Do you regret it? Testifying against them? No. I regret not having the courage to do it sooner. I regret letting you walk out of that rehearsal dinner alone. I regret every day I stayed silent while they hurt people. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a group of children play in the community garden. The air was clean, the water was safe, and the soil grew vegetables instead of harboring toxins. I've been following your work at the EPA, Logan said. The Viola Washington Act passed the House. Looks like it'll become law. Federal environmental justice legislation named after a hotel made from North Carolina. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. She would be proud. Logan repeated the words from his text. Not just of the law, but of who you've become. The communities you've helped. The lives you've saved. Kendra felt the familiar ache of missing her mother, but it was gentler now, warmed by the knowledge that Viola Washington's legacy lived on in ways she never could have imagined. Can I ask you something? Logan said. Sure. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I defended you at that rehearsal dinner? If I'd stood up to my family from the beginning? Kendra considered the question. Honestly, I think we would have gotten married, moved to Houston, and I would have spent my life as a corporate wife while your family kept poisoning communities. I might never have learned what I was capable of. So you're saying my cowardice was actually a good thing? She laughed, surprising herself. I'm saying sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. I'm glad something good came from all the pain I caused. Logan, I need you to understand something. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it or because you're volunteering at health clinics. I forgive you because holding on to that anger was keeping me from being the person I needed to be. Logan's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back. We're different people now. We want different things. We're building different lives. I know, I'm not asking for anything except maybe peace between us. We have that, Kendra said, meaning it. We have peace. As they prepared to leave, Logan asked the question she'd been expecting. Do you think she would have liked me? Your mother? Before all this mess with my family. Kendra looked at the health clinic bearing her mother's name. Thought about the communities that now had clean water because Logan had found the courage to testify. Consider the man he'd become through years of honest work and genuine service. She would have liked who you are now, she said finally. The person who builds health clinics and restores contaminated soil. She would have respected that. As they stood where her mother's house once was, now the site of a new community health center. Logan asked the question she'd never expected. Do you think she would have liked me? Before all this, Kendra's answer would close one chapter and begin another. 3 years after champagne glasses clinked at her humiliation, Kendra raised her own glass at the White House, toasting the signing of the Environmental Justice Act that bore her mother's name. The Oval Office gleamed with afternoon sunlight streaming through bulletproof windows as President Elizabeth Warren signed the most comprehensive environmental justice legislation in American history. Cameras clicked and rolled as she placed her signature on the Viola Washington Environmental Justice Act, federal law that would protect communities from corporate environmental racism for generations to come. This legislation ensures that no community will ever again be treated as disposable because of their income, race, or zip code, President Warren declared, handing the signing pen to Kendra. And it's named for a woman who understood that dignity isn't defined by your job title, but by how you treat other people. Standing behind the president's desk, surrounded by congressional leaders, environmental activists, and community organizers who'd fought for this moment, Kendra touched the locket containing her mother's photo and whispered, "We did it, Mama. They thought we didn't belong, but we built something they can't tear down." The ceremony was broadcast live across the country, watched by millions, including the communities that had suffered from environmental injustice for decades. In Fifth Ward, residents gathered at the community center to watch their victories celebrated in the nation's most powerful office. In rural North Carolina, families who now had clean water cheered from the same creek beds that had once run dark with corporate poison. EPA Administrator Janet Collins approached Kendra after the cameras stopped rolling. 3 years ago, you walked away from a wedding. Today, you've made environmental history. What's next for our youngest regional administrator? Kendra smiled, looking around the Oval Office one more time. More work. There are still communities fighting for clean air and water. Still companies that think poor people don't matter. Still battles to be won. Always the fighter. Always the daughter of Viola Washington. The White House reception that followed felt like a victory celebration decades in the making. Environmental leaders who'd fought corporate pollution since the 1970s embraced younger activists who'd grown up with social media and hashtag campaigns. Community organizers from affected areas mingled with federal prosecutors who'd spent years building cases against polluting corporations. Sarah Chun found Kendra on the South Lawn as the sun set over Washington. "Remember when you were just a heartbroken woman in my law office? I remember thinking my life was over because some rich family rejected me. And now I know my life was just beginning." They stood together watching the sunset, mentor and student who'd become partners in the fight for environmental justice. The Davidson Oil Settlement Fund has distributed over $4 billion to affected communities, Sarah said. Clean water systems, health clinics, educational programs. That's your legacy right there. That's all of our legacy. Every person who refused to accept that poisoned air and water were normal. Every community that fought back. What would you tell that woman who walked out of the rehearsal dinner 3 years ago? Kendra considered the question. I'd tell her that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the door opening to the best thing you'll ever do. I'd tell her that dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you build through the choices you make. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, saw the White House ceremony on the news. "Congratulations. You've built something beautiful. Logan." She showed the message to Sarah, who raised an eyebrow. "You two still keep in touch?" "Occasionally. He's doing good work with environmental restoration. Some people can change, Sarah. Some people can find redemption. And some people use corporate jets to attend environmental justice bill signings," Sarah replied, pointing to the sky where a private plane was circling overhead. Kendra laughed. "That's probably not Logan." As the reception wound down and guests began departing, Kendra found herself alone in the Rose Garden, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. A canceled wedding had become a federal career. Personal humiliation had become public service. One family's cruelty had sparked a movement that would protect millions. Her phone rang. Dr. Angela Foster, the young environmental scientist who'd volunteered for the Davidson oil case and was now leading cleanup efforts across the Southeast. Kendra, you need to see the news. CNN just broke a story about 3 more oil companies facing federal investigation for environmental racism. They're calling it the Davidson effect. Kendra smiled, watching the last of the White House staff clean up from the ceremony. Good. Let them all be afraid. Let them all know that communities won't stay silent anymore. The reporter mentioned that you inspired a whole generation of environmental justice advocates. Said law schools are seeing record applications from students who want to follow your path. That's the real victory, Angela, not the lawsuits or the legislation. The fact that other people now know they can fight back and win. After hanging up, Kendra walked back toward the White House, past the portraits of presidents who'd shaped American history. Soon, she thought, there would be portraits of people like her mother, ordinary Americans who'd done extraordinary things not for fame or fortune, but because they believed everyone deserved dignity. The Uber ride back to her hotel took her past the monuments and memorials that defined Washington's skyline. But tonight, she was thinking about a different kind of monument. The one built not from marble and bronze, but from clean water systems and health clinics, from children who could breathe freely and families who didn't have to choose between staying in their communities and protecting their health. At her hotel, she opened her laptop and began writing her speech for tomorrow's Environmental Justice Conference. Law students, community organizers, and activists from across the country would be attending, looking for inspiration and guidance. She began typing, 3 years ago, I thought my life was defined by other people's opinions of me. I thought my worth was measured by whether I fit into spaces that were never meant for people like me. I was wrong. The words flowed easily, carrying the weight of experience and the hope of possibility. I learned that dignity isn't about being accepted by people who look down on you. Dignity is about building something so meaningful that their opinions become irrelevant. I learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming so powerful in your purpose that they become footnotes in your story. She wrote for 2 hours, crafting a message for anyone who'd ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. If this story of turning humiliation into legislation inspired you, she concluded, thinking of the YouTube videos and social media posts that had helped build support for the environmental justice movement, remember that your biggest heartbreak might actually be pointing you toward your greatest purpose. Remember that sometimes the people who reject you are doing you a favor. They're pushing you towards something better than you ever imagined. She saved the document and closed her laptop, looking out at the Washington skyline one more time. Tomorrow, she'd return to work. There were more communities to protect, more corporations to hold accountable, more environmental justice battles to fight. The Viola Washington Environmental Justice Act was just the beginning. But tonight, in a hotel room in the nation's capital, Kendra Washington allowed herself to feel the full weight of how far she'd come. From a rehearsal dinner where she was made to feel small, to the Oval Office where she'd watched her mother's name become federal law. She thought about that moment 3 years ago when Logan's family had called her mother the help and suggested she didn't belong at million-dollar weddings. They'd been right about one thing. She didn't belong there. She belonged somewhere much bigger. 3 years after champagne glasses clinked at her humiliation, Kendra raised her own glass at the White House, toasting the signing of the Environmental Justice Act that bore her mother's name. And in that moment, surrounded by the power of federal law and the promise of protected communities, she knew that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you really is the beginning of the best thing you'll ever do.